What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by special guest Jack Harris of the LA Times, joining us, I believe, from Arizona after a trip from Toronto. So thanks for weathering the travel and getting up early with us this morning, Jack.
Yeah, you bet. I'm trying to still get my bearings here. I think I'm in Phoenix, but yeah, no, it's been good.
We joked on our show last night that it's got to be brutal to be that far away from home and then to get as close as Phoenix is to Los Angeles and still be sleeping in a hotel room. Is that a pretty accurate assessment?
Yeah, I mean, this trip, it's been a lot of travel to start the year, but this one has been, when the schedule comes out, you always look for like the ones that are just going to be at the end, you're going to be dead. And like this is one where, no travel days. You have like late night flights, and then to fly across the country, but still not be all the way home. At least it's still early in the year, so still a lot of gas in the tank.
There we go. I like to hear that. Yeah, maybe sometimes it's better to get these trips out of the way rather than throwing this in like early August or something like that when everybody's just waiting for the end. Well, 30 games into the season. Obviously, a week and a half ago, it was doom and gloom from a lot of Dodgers fans. I'm sure you saw those people on social media. Now they won, 6 of their last 7, 5-1 on this road trip. Just big picture, as you look at this team 30 games in, what's kind of your evaluation of what you've seen so far?
I mean, I think you've seen, like, I look at these last couple weeks as kind of a good example of this. You had the 3-7 stretch, and you have this last week where they go 6-1 and they're blowing teams out and the offense is looking good. And one of the things I've been thinking about is like which version of that team is closer to the one we're probably going to see for the rest of the year. And I think it's probably the one we saw on this last road trip where the pitching was better, where the lineup, not just the top 4 guys, but the lineup as a whole was much more productive, much more consistent, much better in situations, key situations, driving in runs, getting guys in from scoring position, all that kind of stuff. That said, what you saw in that 3-7 stretch, which like every team's going to have a bad couple weeks, every team's going to go through lulls. It's not an alarm that the Dodgers lost 7 out of 10 games. I think the bigger thing that I took away from that is what happened in those games, right? And so many of the little things that popped up and just a couple weeks into the year. And I think for Dodger fans, what was probably troublesome about it is those were a lot of the same things that have doomed them in the last couple Octobers, right? It was not being able to get guys in with runners in scoring position. It was not getting very good starts from your pitchers and putting too much stress on a bullpen that at least right now is kind of a patchwork group trying to work around the guys who are missing. So like this team is going to be one that, barring something really unexpected, is going to win a lot of games, should be the best team in the NL West, should be in a very good position going into October. All the things we expected and all the things that this last week during, how they played in DC and Toronto kind of confirmed. But on that homestand, they also showed that there's still some holes in how they're built, and there's still ways that teams can beat them. And there are still some little flaws that are capable of popping up over even a 10-game stretch that, does not make them invincible and harkens back to some of the problems they've had in the last couple of Octobers. So like those are things that I think moving forward, like that's kind of how I look at the team, right? Can you avoid those stretches? Can you clean up those things on a really consistent basis? No team's going to be perfect, but the more those kinds of things happen, I think the more that concern kind of lingers, regardless of how many games they're winning, regardless of where they're at in the standings.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, it is like sometimes when you go out and sign Ohtani and Yamamoto and Glass now, it's easy to be like, well, this is a super team and it's invincible. And it's like, yeah, this is a sport that there's a reason there's 26 guys on a roster and 40 on the extended roster. I'm curious, as you think about those concerns, bullpen depth, ability to hit with runners in scoring position, when you look at the roster, like, do you feel like they have the answers internally to fix some of those things to prevent those 3 stretches from coming up and popping up at the worst possible time? Or do you think that exposed maybe some areas where there was weakness and it's real and they need to figure something out?
Well, they should have the answers, I think, when you look at the roster, when you look at the talent, even when you look at sort of the bigger organizational depth. Like the runners in scoring position thing, I think Ohtani is a really good example of this. As a guy who has struggled in those spots, you can kind of pinpoint why he has struggled in those spots. You look at that at bat he had that last game in Toronto where you have 2 on, nobody out. You get an inside fastball you swing at and foul off. You get a fastball way above the zone that you swing at. Those are pitches like he can do damage on. Like, he's good enough to still try to turn that around and get a base hit or get a sac fly. And I understand in a situation like that for him, right? It's, well, I might not get a better pitch to hit in this at bat. I'm at least getting a fastball somewhere where I can do some damage on it. So, I mean, he's good enough to produce in those situations. It's about executing in them. And I think that goes for the entire team right now, right? It's about, can you hone in that higher level of execution? Can you stick to a disciplined enough approach? As far as things like the bullpen concerns, I think a lot of that comes down to, are guys like Ryan Brazier and Joe Kelly going to be reliable pieces over the long haul after a pretty up and down start to the year for them? Are guys like Blake Trinan and down the road Brusdar Graterol going to come back and be contributing parts? And if those things aren't happening, do you have to go out and find somebody externally to come in and bolster the group, or are there people internally that you can get more out of? I think somebody like Alex Vesia has kind of had an interesting start to the year where it hasn't looked great, but right now he's probably one of their higher leverage relievers, especially in any sort of run of the lineup where they're facing left-handers. The lineup depth, I think, kind of falls in a similar category, right? It's, okay, well, is Gavin Lux the guy who hit 150 or whatever it was over the first month of the season? Or is it the guy this last week who suddenly looks a little bit more comfortable and confident at the plate and is putting together 2-hit games and those kinds of things? So that to me is the question right now. Is, we're still dealing with a very small sample size of the full season, obviously. And it's going to be easy to, in a few small moments where they struggle, or even just in a week where they struggle, sort of nitpick some of that stuff. But at the same time, like, that's where, this team should be talented enough, should have the pieces and the players to fix some of the issues you saw on that homestand, to avoid some of the things, the bigger issues going back to the last couple seasons that have popped up in the playoffs. But, you have a long time to kind of see what you have internally. And, for as much talent as they have, the question becomes like this, how they played on this last road trip. Can you keep that going? Can you make that a more extended run? And can you start showing, especially against some of the depth pieces and in some of these specific situations, can you start showing, continued improvement over the course of a year?
Well, and let's not forget, they have Nabil Crismat to solve all of the bullpen issues now, Jack.
Right.
As you look big picture, I'm curious, like, we've got the guys at the top. Nobody's surprised by what Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani and Will Smith and Freddie Freeman are doing. They're awesome. Nobody's surprised, I would say, by Tyler Glasnow. I think Yoshinobu Yamamoto has sort of, post-Korea, been the pitcher that everybody was sort of hoping and expecting he would be. I'm curious for you, as you look at this group again after 30 games, which is not a perfect sample size, but also we've gotten to the point where it's not an insignificant sample size. What would you say is the biggest thing that surprised you so far about the Dodgers?
I mean, I think it's probably, the way that it's not a surprise, the way the top four is played, or the way Tyler Glasnow has performed, or the way Yoshinobu Yamamoto has kind of seemingly turned a corner here. But I think the big one is just how well that part of the roster, all these big moves they've made, like how well a lot of that is clicking so far. We just went to Toronto, where you had a team that has, in some ways, its own like big three, right? With Vlad and George Springer and Bo Bichette, and like all those guys are struggling. You look at the Houston Astros right now, one of the most consistent teams in baseball of the last decade, all the other stuff aside. And they've been one of the worst teams in the league right now. So I think if you're the Dodgers, like, maybe surprise is the wrong word, but it's like an affirmation, right? Of, hey, we invested a lot to build around this core group of guys. And so far they're delivering in a way that I don't even think, internally the Dodgers might have been expecting to this point. Probably the most key guy to all that is Mookie Betts, right? It's how well he has adjusted to the shortstop position, how well his entire game has kind of blossomed around, the way he has approached that challenge and that, responsibility, as he calls it, to take over that spot and play every day and not let it impact any other parts of his game. And I think when you look at, that this top four group as a whole, right? Will Smith is seemingly getting to maybe another level as a hitter. Tyler Glasnow is seemingly, again, health concerns aside, starting to look like the guy like the Dodgers were betting that he would look like. Same with Yamamoto. So I think on the whole, this team, it probably looks about like what we expected to this point. It's just, seeing the vision that they had for that top 4 group of hitters and the top 2 guys at the start of the rotation, and being a month into the year and getting as much production as they have out of them, I think has just eliminated one of the potential, it is confirmed what, if you were a Dodger fan, you were hoping that group was going to look like. And again, probably right now, even surpassing how good you thought they could be.
No, I'm glad you say that, because I do think, Jack, sometimes, like, and I'm guilty of this too. I take for granted the fact that the guys who are supposed to be awesome are actually awesome. And to your point, when you look around the league, I mean, even we were doing a series preview for Arizona, like Corbin Carroll's hitting like James Outman and Gavin Lux are hitting right now. And so I think sometimes, I even asked the question poorly, because I was like, well, come on, we knew all these guys were going to be awesome. It's like, we definitely hoped they would be awesome, but to think that there's 100% success rate of superstars just constantly and continuously being superstars, I appreciate you bringing that up to say, yeah, but it's not nothing that you have 4 guys at the top of your lineup who are all expected to be, among the best players in the sport, and especially at their position. And oh, by the way, all 4 of them are meeting or exceeding expectations to some degree. I sense, at least, Jack, and I don't know if you would agree with this, that I do think we take that for granted sometimes.
Oh, I think it's one of those things that, taking for granted is probably the easy way to put it. But I think it's one of those things, like, with the way this team was built, like, the Dodgers have to have that, right? Yeah. There's so many other ways that things can go wrong if those guys are hurt or not producing or whatever else, that, for the Dodgers to be anywhere close to their full potential level this year, they need all of those guys playing well. Like, over the course of it, in baseball, it is rare, even with a team as talented as this one, to kind of see that. You have to look at last year's playoffs, where, nobody would have expected Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman to struggle as much as they did, and for Clayton Kershaw to have the kind of start he did. But, like, those are the kinds of things that happen. So, if you're the Dodgers, like, you made a bit of a bet that these guys would all be as good as you need them to be, and so far they have been.
Yeah, let's talk specifically about one of those guys, Shohei Ohtani. I know he's sort of been in the market of Southern California. He's now in Los Angeles. You're now getting to experience the zoo that is the group of people that I'm sure follow Shohei Ohtani absolutely everywhere he goes, with a little bit of controversy and gambling conspiracy theories sprinkled in, just to make your life extra exciting. Jack, what's that been like to show up to a stadium where, there's always a big crowd when the Dodgers are in town, and now it's seemingly, from the outside, exponentially bigger and more circusy?
Yeah, I think at this point you're getting used to it a little bit. The biggest difference, with the way he is covered and the attention around him is it's just like every little thing he does carries so much importance and so much interest and so much weight. So we saw in spring training how every batting practice he took became this big show-stopping event at camp. It's when he started his throwing program, and every time he plays catch, you have 50 people over there recording every throw and marking down, how many throws he's doing and what it looks like and what's the intensity level, and is it 60 feet or 80 feet, or like how far out is he throwing from? And that's something that, even with the star players that the Dodgers have had the last couple of years, or most of the star players around baseball, you just don't see that level of attention and spotlight on every little thing they do. And then it only gets amplified when you also have Yoshinobu Yamamoto here. And because of that, there's a lot of little things that the Dodgers are doing that anybody around those guys with this team do that become big deals. So Shohei Ohtani says he's swinging a cricket bat in Wrigley Field. Suddenly everybody wants to know who else on the Dodgers was swinging a cricket bat in Wrigley Field. Miguel Rojas is seen talking to Shohei Ohtani in the dugout. Okay, what were they talking about? What was the context of that conversation? And typically, like, the answer is it's normal stuff, right? Like, Shohei Ohtani swinging a cricket bat because, yeah, it's a training tool, but also it was a 3-hour rain delay, and he was bored and wanted to have fun with something. And these guys in the dugout are talking about approaches and what they're seeing from pitchers and all the typical stuff that happens. It's just that there is such a spotlight on it now that it all becomes news, and everybody wants to know what's happening around it, especially obviously like the international press corps that is here to document every little thing that these guys do. So I think that's the biggest difference. It's also one that the longer the year goes on, I think the more normalized it becomes, the less some of some of those really minor things behind the scenes, I think, becomes big of deals. But to this point, it is still so novel and so new that, yeah, it's just been interesting to see how things that in previous seasons would have been really mundane and and something that we wouldn't have been asking Dave Roberts about, or we wouldn't really have been taking note of, suddenly become, these little storylines that day to day you try to track down and follow and see what little nugget of information or anecdote you can get out of it.
Can I ask just a very sort of inside baseball nerdy question here? Because this is something I'm fascinated by. The presence of an interpreter, like, or a translator, I should say. I know that the language here is important, but like, I have found it so fascinating how what you guys are told in English is the translation of what Ohtani just said. And then there's the backstory where it's like people on Twitter are like, that's not actually what he said. And so like, how have you navigated that, especially as the scrutiny has increased? Like, are you having to do your own translation? Are you taking the Dodgers' word for it? Like, how is the LA Times approaching that? Just out of curiosity.
We have a very big resource, and his name is Dylan Hernandez, who is just like a walking multi-language translator himself.
Perfect.
He will speak English and Spanish, but most of all Japanese. But yes, like this is something that even going back to covering him with the Angels in 2021, I remember is at the end of that season, people started asking him, are you getting frustrated here? What are you thinking about your future? Whatever. So there's always the direct translation, right? Of like, okay, what exactly did he say in Japanese? How does it compare to what he said in English? I think we've seen situations like that with the home run ball incident, and with some other, smaller things that have popped up over the year. But then there's also like the context of it all, right? And there's the things like in Japanese, sometimes it's the things you don't say that can be as telling as the things you do, or it's the way you say it, or all that kind of stuff. So, for me, that's been a huge benefit for us to have somebody who is fluent in Japanese on staff who can, we can send audio to, and he can translate it for us, and then also fill in all of the other context about what he might be trying to say, or what this means. I mean, even when it came to like the marriage announcement, right? Ohtani calls his wife a normal or like civilian woman. That's like a cultural thing. People want to know, is she a celebrity? Is she not a celebrity? Like, and it's all that kind of stuff that, can get tricky and is a little tenuous to trying to navigate. And for us, again, is a big benefit that we have somebody we can go to and can make sure that we are taking what he says and reporting it and framing it accurately to our readers.
Yeah. One last Ohtani question. You're just coming back from Toronto. You guys had a big piece about all of the drama around Ohtani allegedly flying to, allegedly signing with the Blue Jays. He gets booed. There's the Hockey Hall of Fame who says he's not allowed to come. You were kind of reporting that angle and paying attention to that angle. Talk me through what surprised you, what didn't surprise you about how Ohtani was received in a place that he never personally did anything bad to.
I mean, the boos surprised me. Calling people in Toronto, asking some fans up there or people around the team, like, what kind of reception do you expect him to get? Most of them thought it would be maybe not entirely positive, but they weren't expecting that. And the reason is because of what you just said is, their view was, well, for as excited as people got when they thought he was coming, at the end of the day, he's not the one who directly like put those reports out there or tried to fool everybody in the world about what was happening that day before he announced he was coming to the Dodgers. I think some people still think he was, something happened and he was maybe trying to use the Blue Jays as leverage, even though, based on what we know about how his free agency played out, like he went to the teams with these contract offers and that was kind of the extent of the negotiating when it came down to the end. I think a big part of it is the Blue Jays fans' own frustration with their team right now. Like Justin Turner was their biggest signing and has actually been very good to start the year for them. He's been their best hitter. But if you're a team that's coming off of 2 sweeps in the wild card round and sensing that, you need to make a big splash, you just did these huge renovations to your stadium. And then suddenly you think you might be getting Shohei Ohtani. And then not only do you strike out on him, but you have a relatively quiet offseason otherwise. And now your team, they're off to one of the worst starts offensively of any team in baseball right now. I think there was a big part of that too. It's just the frustration of, man, this is a guy we could have had. Our team isn't hitting right now. Think about how awesome the season could have been. And also we had to deal with this whole flight, non-flight situation. Maybe he used us for leverage. Maybe he didn't. You know what? I'm so frustrated right now. I'm just going to start booing at him. And then he hits a home run in the first at bat. So, I think in hindsight, like you see how the crowd could maybe get to that point, but it was surprising. Like when he stepped up to the plate, or even when they announced his name pregame, people started booing. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then he steps up to the plate and they really start booing him, which is something that I wasn't expecting. Definitely people with the Dodgers weren't expecting when you were talking to them leading up to the week. And again, it's just a reflection of I think if you're a Dodger fan, right, it's kind of that interesting, through the looking mirror thing of man, that could have been us, right? Like we could have been the team that missed out on him and now have to think about a world of what could have been. And then you couple that with kind of the poor start the Blue Jays have gotten off to. It was just a whole kind of combination of stuff that led to that moment.
And again, people should check out, you got an article up last week kind of breaking down sort of the behind the scenes of how people were responding to news. One question I wanted to ask you didn't necessarily insert yourself into the story, obviously, but I'm curious what that experience was like for you as reports are coming out that Ohtani is on a plane. I know that sourcing was complicated on this one because there was only 2 people that really knew what was happening, and not even they totally knew what was happening. But what was it like for you when John Morosi is saying, hey, he's en route, and then you've got the report, hey, it's a done deal, Ohtani's signing with Toronto? What was that like as a beat reporter?
Well, there was a personal layer of this where I was actually at the wedding of another baseball writer. So that whole day, it's like, okay, am I bringing my hotel to this Am I bringing my laptop to this wedding? You have a bunch of baseball people at this thing, not knowing what is going on. What do we expect? I think 2 things were happening that day. One, there was some level of rumblings from some corner of the industry that, hey, something might be happening. Hey, keep an eye on the Blue Jays. Now that said, in the weeks leading up to that, there was a day where the rumblings were, hey, keep an eye on the Cubs. They're going to make a big push. Hey, keep an eye on the Giants. They could be in this. The whole time there was a feeling from a lot of people like, hey, he might just want to go back to the Angels after all. So that part, that day was the Blue Jays day, at least from some of the stuff we were hearing. At the same time, it was pretty clear that however this was going to unfold, I think even as Andrew Friedman alluded to, this is a guy who isn't going to leak something out there, right?
Yeah.
It was pretty clear that when he was ready to sign, it was probably going to come from a press release or social media post or something else, that it wasn't going to be one of these he's reportedly signing pending a physical for 3 days and then nobody gets official confirmation until the next week. So At no point was I convinced he was signing with Toronto that day. And at no point did I, even with the flight stuff, again, it's hard to know in the moment. And I think also in hindsight, it's easy to say oh, I definitely didn't think he was on the flight to Toronto.
Yeah.
I wasn't certain that he wasn't. But there was just something about the way all of the news was kind of unfolding that day that did seem a little off, or just wouldn't have been how you would have expected that to play out. And then, it became a rather comical point of conversation by the end of the night at that wedding, and then obviously led into the next day. So it was a memorable one for sure.
There you go. Well, let me get a few sort of quick thoughts from you on some various topics. Walker Buehler rehab assignment tomorrow. The other guy, Clayton Kershaw, we know is kind of on a much longer timeline here. Just quickly, from your perspective, what kind of expectations do you have for these 2 guys?
That's a great question. I think right now it's easier to pinpoint with Buehler just because we're seeing him in game action. He's basically at the finish line of his recovery now. I think the stuff, by all accounts, the fastball still is right around the velo he had before, and the reports on that the team has gotten on him is that when it looks good, there were times where he still flashes his best stuff. Now at the same time, there's been a level of inconsistency during this rehab stint, and really during this whole build up to the year for him. That is part of the reason why it has taken as long as it has. Although I think one thing to keep in mind is going back to the spring, my expectation is probably going to take him about a month to be ready to rejoin the rotation anyway. And then maybe the timeline got sped up a little. And then it just like this is one of those things that the Dodgers are waiting for or giving him as much time as possible to come back. So I'm expecting when he comes back for him to be at least a useful part of the rotation, right? I think the big question is he still going to be a guy that can go out and be, somebody who's closer to like the Glasnow Yamamoto level, right? Where he's going to be able to be pushing into the 6th inning, into 7th innings, getting to double-digit strikeouts, doing some of the things that we've seen him do in the past? Or is he going to be somebody who's more of a, hey, look, he's a useful piece in the rotation. He's going to be able to make regular starts. He's going to be productive, but at the same time, he's no longer the guy that you're going to count on as being a number 1 or 2 part of your playoff rotation. I think that's going to be kind of the difference or the thing that the Dodgers are going to have to watch with him. And until he gets on a big league mound and starts facing big league hitters again and starts, trying to take wherever his arsenal is at now and attacking MLB opposition, it's going to be tough to know. But I'm expecting he'll be, the floor isn't going to be super low. It's just, is the ceiling going to be as high as what Dodger fans remember? I think with Kershaw, it's a much bigger question, right? Like there's still so many steps that he's got to get to before he's even, facing live hitting and going on a rehab assignment and doing all those things that, I think to kind of boil it down, you can expect a certain level of production from Walker Buehler at this point, would be my guess, over the course of the year. And I think it's still a little early to be saying like, oh, hey, Clayton Kershaw is going to be in the rotation at the end of the year and could be an option in the playoffs or any of those things. I think at least at this stage, it's a much safer bet to make on Buehler, just given where he's at in his recovery and how far Kershaw still has to go.
One other starting pitcher, a guy we haven't heard a ton about, Bobby Miller. He goes on the injured list. The last report before the road trip was kind of, hey, he's going to begin throwing or something along those lines. And do you have any update on where Bobby Miller's at and what his timeline might look like?
Yeah, I mean, he started throwing. The thing with any of these pitcher injuries, right, is you have to start playing catch, start extending your catch play. And then the key thing is, how do you feel? Is, in Bobby Miller's case, is your shoulder still getting sore? Are you bouncing back the right way? And last we've heard, that's the stage he's at now, right? Is trying to ramp up activity, seeing how he feels. The Dodgers have been very adamant that this is not a major thing, that this was kind of a precautionary, step for him, just given some of the soreness he was feeling. But yeah, he still hasn't gotten to that point yet, right, where he's facing hitters or going on a rehab assignment or any of those things. So, and the longer it takes to get to that point, the longer the whole ramp up process is from there. So I still think this is more of a shorter to maybe medium range return for him, but a lot of it just depends on, how these next couple of weeks go and how his throwing program progresses.
On the offensive side, there's a few guys who have struggled, a bunch of guys, I should say, at the bottom of the lineup have struggled. I'm curious from people that you talk to internally, when it comes to guys like Chris Taylor, James Outman, Gavin Lux, 3 players who have not hit anywhere near sort of the level that maybe was hoped for. Internally, is there one of those guys or a couple of those guys where there's maybe more optimism and more reasons for fans to believe that a turnaround is coming?
I think right now Lux is the one that this whole process probably makes, or the struggles probably make the most sense, right? He missed so much time. So much of his camp, while his bat, by all accounts, looked really good during camp, the whole shortstop to second base thing, like I think personally, it was an extra burden for him to have to deal with. And all that stuff kind of bleeds into the regular season, and then you start struggling. And I think for him, and he said as much himself, is after those first couple of weeks, he just kind of needed to take a step back, reset, remember like, okay, I'm back at second base. I can succeed here. I got to get my legs back under me after missing so much time. And this week you've seen, again, a guy who's had a couple multi-hit games, who's just looked a little bit more competitive in the box. James Outman, to me, this stretch of him is just kind of reminiscent of last year, right? Where it's, he had a couple like microwave hot stretches, and then he went really cold for long periods of time. I think just the way, I think he's going to be one of these players who's probably going to be prone to stretches like that. And it's about how quickly can he get out of it? How quickly can he turn the page? Can he still produce some power even in moments where he isn't playing as well? I think this is on the lower end of what you're going to see from him this year. But at the same time, the longer it goes on, I think and the longer somebody like Andy Pages is playing well and that kind of stuff, I think the more you kind of look at that center field position and have to decide, like, how do we want to divvy up playing time there? What do we want to do? And then Chris Taylor is the one that, the context around what's happened with him is he went into this offseason determined to try to get, what he calls like the feels in his swing, right? The swing thoughts, the mental cues back to, before his injury and that 2021 offseason, back to when he was an all-star, back to his peak year with the Dodgers. It hasn't worked. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You get older and your body changes. You have injuries and suddenly, it's like a golf swing, right? It's like, oh, I used to be able to think about this at the top of my backswing and I would be great. And now I do it and it doesn't work for whatever reason. He acknowledged himself that he probably stuck with that process a little bit too long into the year and is sort of trying to adjust on the fly right now. That's a pretty daunting process and I think helps explain why it has looked as bad as it has for him. That said, I think the Dodgers are still going to give him some leash right now to try to work through some of this stuff. Part of that is just personnel wise, like as long as Jason Hayward is out, I don't think they're feeling there's not like an obvious other option for them to bring up and replace Chris Taylor with or something like that. They still like his versatility defensively, and they still believe that there's production in his bat, that there's pop there, that he can be a guy that when he gets things synced up can be useful. But his struggles, I think, have definitely been the most surprising to people and are the ones that, at this stage still seem like maybe the furthest away from being fully rectified, even if you can kind of pinpoint like, well, here's what went wrong. Here's what he's working through right now. And here's why, they're going to give him time to try to get through it.
One last question, then some rapid fire stuff. You mentioned Andy Pages. The question we get more than anything on our streams is, what in the world are the Dodgers going to do when everybody is healthy with Andy Pages? Obviously, with the latest Jason Hayward updates, thankfully, the Dodgers are probably thankful that they're maybe a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks away from having to make this decision. But from your perspective, if you had to guess, Jason Hayward comes back, is healthy, ready to produce. You've got Outman, who's, as you mentioned, in the midst of his own struggles. Taylor looks really, really bad. Pages is tearing it up. How do you think the Dodgers divvy things up out there?
That's a good question. I think the one big kind of variable in that hypothetical is like the time period, right? Yeah. So if Jason Hayward was coming back maybe like next week, and then Andy Pages had a couple like down games or something like that, like suddenly his numbers might not look quite as good and it might be easier to send him back, whatever. If I think the thing with Pages is that I think there's two kind of separate things here. If Pages continues to produce like he is over a larger sample, I don't foresee him being sent down. Like he's looked way too comfortable, way too dangerous. Everything he's hitting right now, like even the outs he's making, he's crushing the ball. Yeah. Now that said, the reality with situations like this is they tend to work themselves out. Guys typically, especially I don't remember how many times in the last couple of years we've asked the Dodgers, like, hey, when this pitcher comes back, are you going to go with a 6-man rotation? And by the time they're back, they've actually lost 2 more pitchers by that point. Yeah. So it's still so kind of early in everybody's season that, between now and in a couple of weeks, things could change dramatically. But when Hayward does come back, assuming everybody's healthy, I think that's going to be the first time where the Dodgers, I think, have to sit down and ask themselves a couple questions, right? It's like, okay, is Chris Taylor going to remain a key part of our team? Is James Outman going to be somebody that is still going to be getting regular playing time for us? Or if he's still struggling, do we need to think about sending him back down? So it's hard to like give one answer right now because so many different things could change by the time Hayward returns. But I think the one thing that I'd be confident in is if Andy Pages is hitting over 300 and has an OPS around 900 by the time Hayward returns, he's not going to be the first one getting taken off of this team, would be my guess.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that Hayward wasn't exactly crushing the ball prior to getting injured either. So I think, the variable is you could see one of a couple different guys who are finding ways to get those guys off of the 26-man roster. Outman's obviously got options, so lots of things there. Let me get you out of here. I warned you ahead of time. We talk a little bit of food. I like to get to know people via food. So I've got 2 food questions for you. The first is, in Los Angeles, where's your favorite place to eat?
I really like my wife and I really like Terra, which is at the top of the Eataly in Century City. It's a good spot. Man, I'm on the spot now and drawing blanks. A smaller place in Culver City is called Moto Ramen,
Okay.
which is like maybe become our favorite place to get dinner at the last over the off season here. And then like I hate to give you like a basic answer, but we do like a once a year, like, or try to get to like a Nobu in Malibu or something like that. So, but yeah, but Tara's typically the hey, we want like a nice dinner. Let's like, well, that's kind of our go-to there.
When you said you were going to give me a basic answer, I was expecting like a fast food restaurant or something there, and you went the complete
Well,
opposite.
so then, the late night move is the Tommy's on Rampart. So that could be the other basic one too.
That was my go-to. Anytime we would go to Dodger games, it was Tommy's before the game, and just freaking that place is amazing. So, okay, last question here. This is my favorite question. If you walk into a convenience store and you're purchasing one beverage, one snack, salty something, and one sweet something, and you can pick. I mean, if you've got a favorite convenience store, that there's a variety of options here, but what are you walking out of? One drink, one snack, one dessert.
Bold Chex Mix will be the salty one. Probably a Starburst or Skittles on the sweet thing. Okay. And then gosh, which drink? Good question. I mean, we're a Coke Zero household, so it's typically going to be that.
Awesome. Well, hey, Jack, we greatly appreciate your time. Enjoy Arizona. Folks, check him out over at LA Times, also on social media everywhere. Any articles coming out soon, Jack? Anything you want to point people to in specific?
No, just a lot of daily coverage right now. They've given us a lot to write about on the field recently, so that's been a nice change of pace after all of the off-field stuff that we were writing about earlier in the year.
I love it. Well, check Jack out there, and thank you everybody for joining us here on Dodger Heads. You can subscribe, ring the notification bell down below. Check us out. We have live post-game shows on Tuesdays and Fridays, and a live podcast every Sunday night as well. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. As always, go Dodgers.